Hey, and welcome to the Get Fit with Jodelle podcast. And I am beyond excited. Just stars are popping out of my head right now because I have with me today Dr. Nasha Winters. And I'm so excited because I have poured through this woman's book for like over a year now, or whenever it first came out anyway. And there's like so much, there's sand in here because I took it to the beach and I was reading it on the beach. So there's like little sand particles in here, and then there's crayons and everything because I use a crayon instead of a highlighter because of my toddler. So anyway, Dr. Nasha is here, and I wanted her to come on to talk all things having to do with ketogenic diets, but more than that, how to prevent, how to approach something from a cancer standpoint. We are dealing with this more so today than ever. And I wanted to go to the source of someone who knows what they're talking about with regard to cancer and research and how to prevent it, how to deal with it, how to, even if we have to, live with it, but also more than that, how to live optimally with it or without it. So, and what I love about this book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer, is that it's not just for someone, and we're going to talk about this, not just for someone that's dealing with cancer or knows someone with cancer. Every single person on the planet can benefit from this. So, Dr. Nasha, thank you so much for your time today and joining me. Please just share with me like what brought you on this journey. I know you're a naturopathic integrative oncologist, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I would love to know like what brought you to that? Like how did you come into that line of work?
Well, it definitely, I mean, my gosh, I think we have an hour so we can go in. Without letting me be, joining you today. I really love the work that you do. I'm a huge stand-up paddleboard fan. My puppies just learned how to paddleboard this year. Such a big deal. I spent my winter in Mexico for 2 months. So it was a joy to be warm.
Okay. So we're going together at some point. We're going to go paddling together.
And you can teach me some new tips because I'm still kind of still figuring it out, but thank you for that.
Yeah.
So I've always been interested. I mean, my mom will tell you that I nursed my stuffed animals, to health when I was a kid. And one of my youngest memories, I was maybe 3 or 4 years old and remember seeing all the little baby birds that would fall out of trees in windstorms and little chipmunks, squirrels, and I was always bringing something that was probably infested with like fleas and rabies to my mom to help us, resurrect. Multiple times we were bottle feeding little tiny creatures. So I've always just had a desire to, I guess, heal, others. And I think a lot of it comes from, I was not a healthy being. I remember also my earliest memories of just always being really uncomfortable, a lot of GI issues. They put me on Gas X at like 2 years old. I couldn't digest anything. And I was just like, I looked like one of those little African kwashiorkor babies with a giant belly and little stick legs, just like a little caricature. Because we didn't know the things we know today. It was obvious. Now, other testing years later, it's like, oh, good, I've got, celiac, I've got major leaky gut. My mom decided that soy milk made a lot more sense than something out of her breast. The things that we just didn't do then led me to a lot of health issues at a very young age, to the point with all the soy milk by the age of 9, I was menstruating. And this is back in the 70s, 80s, you guys. Today we see that. It's not normal, but it happens a lot. We weren't seeing it back then. So all of my own weird health issues that eventually culminated in a terminal diagnosis at the ripe age of 19, turning 20, led me to completely redirect my path. I was pre-med. I was an undergraduate. I was a dual major biology, chemistry, and this diagnosis literally kicked my ass and woke me up and redirected me in figuring out how to basically save my own life. That's a very condensed version because the story is pretty long and crazy, to put it mildly, but I switched my degree to a biology psychology major because I understood somehow that there was a lot of emotional trauma, childhood trauma that also fed into this process. And I knew that I could address my own health without also addressing some of that. And so that psychology degree, it also pushed me into working in a lot of environments. I was working as a detox counselor. I was working in a psych unit. All the things I think I wanted to understand where I came from that much more is what it drove me into. And eventually conventional medical school didn't seem like a fit. So I started researching. I didn't want to be a PhD psychologist. I didn't, I wasn't really finding anything. And then one day I stumbled across this naturopathic medicine.
Yeah.
This is like 1991. Okay. And so, or the end of 91, early part of 92. And lo and behold, I started doing a road trip, learned about the schools up in the Pacific Northwest, and ended up going there eventually.
Wow.
And part of my preparation for starting naturopathic medical school in 1996 was I started really putting myself into healing environments. I started working in health food stores. I started working with a local herbalist and learning, about herbal medicines. I started working in native communities and working with ancient traditional healing medicines like sweat lodge and other native healing practices. I started traveling around the world, time in India, working in hospitals and healing centers there, and learning that there was a heck of a lot more to medicine than a prescription pad and a surgical intervention.
Mm-hmm.
And so it inspired me to realize that really health care or health in general depends on the beholder, depends on the person. We all seem to want to look outward to find someone to heal us, help us, cure us, give us the magic pill, but that doesn't exist. And I know people are always seeking that, but you have to find your own inner reserve. And I feel like my 27 plus year journey, well, almost 27 years, to be 27 years in October,
Yeah.
journey has led me to know that I am way more powerful than I'm led to believe, and that I have the ability to heal myself on a much deeper level. And my whole mission is to help others see that within themselves.
Oh, I think podcast done. Like we're done there. That was perfect. No, I just love everything that you said, because like, it's so beautiful that this journey started even like, it was just in you, like even like as a little girl, it was just in you. So I love that. And I love that you have made it like your mission, not only to heal yourself, but now take it to the next level and see who else you could help with the knowledge that you came into. So I kind of want to know more about your diagnosis, if you can talk about that. Like, how old were you again when that happened?
Well, I was actually diagnosed. So I was diagnosed October 21st, 1991. Mm-hmm. My birthday is September 30th, 1971. So I had just turned 20 years old, but I'd been very sick the year before, in and out of hospitals, emergency rooms, doctor's visits, trying to source what was going on within me. And basically I was treated like a crazy person. Okay. It's all in your head, or you have an STD, or you must have an ectopic pregnancy, or you've had GI issues your whole life. So it's just IBS. I mean, and I kept saying, yeah, I've had GI issues all my life, but this is different. And it wasn't until I finally landed in the emergency room looking 9 months pregnant, a fluid that built up in my abdomen within a matter of days, and that I wasn't urinating anymore. And what was coming out was brown sludge, and that I turned yellow and I was puking my guts out, to by the time I got to the ER, they're like, you're in stage organ failure. My liver and kidney had shut down. Wow. My electrolytes they couldn't believe I hadn't had a heart attack. My iron storage levels were 2. They couldn't believe I even any oxygen. I mean, my oxygen levels were around 70. These are things back then that I wasn't even occurring to ask these questions, because it was so far back. Right. At a time when I was just pre-med in the sciences, not anything clinically relevant really. So now I can look back and understand what I was going through. I was in end stage. I was dying. I should have died. And that's basically what they told me was, oops, now that we figured out what this is, which they finally figured out was stage 4 ovarian cancer that had metastasized to my liver. And the tumor in my right ovary had squished off my ureter, and also my right kidney, and shut that down. And then I filled up with fluid, ascites fluid, which was malignant, not just fluid accumulation. So it was actually secondary cancer itself. And I had peritoneal implants and lymph nodes everywhere. So I was literally filled up with cancer and extremely cachectic. So very malnourished, very wasted, outside of looking hugely pregnant. But I was very, very muscle wasted. And so at that time they actually said, God, it's just so surreal when I kind of go back on these things, but they were like, there's any treatment at this point would absolutely kill you. Wow. So we and even at that time in my community, hospice wasn't available, but Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work was just kind of picking up momentum in the late 80s, early 90s. But they did basically send me to what was in essence a hospice or palliative environment. And I did seek a few more opinions, but the same was held true. So I just thought I was done. I mean, they told me they said up to 3 months, really. And at that point, now that I know what I know, I shouldn't have had 3 weeks of being where I was in state of health, because I know what that looks like now, being on the other side of it. So that has led to me kind of saying, well, I'm going to learn everything I can on my way out, was sort of the essence of it.
So you started right in that palliative care. You started researching everything.
Exactly. And palliative care, there was nothing they could offer me. So I found an acupuncturist who did pain management with me, because I don't respond to drugs. I'm a lot of fun. So opiates don't work in my body at all. Now, I mean, again, now that we know epigenetics all these years down the road, everything makes sense. It's like I've lived long enough for the science to catch up with the modern miracles of my body.
Yeah.
These things I figured out of, well, why is it that they could just pump me up full of drugs and it would never work? Or why codeine, makes me have major hallucinations of a Vlasic stork pickle, a pickle stork chasing me on ice, on an ice skating rink. Those are the weird hallucinations I get now if I get a fever, thanks to a codeine reaction.
Wow.
So I now know I'm burning a fever over 102 and the Vlasic pickle guy is coming towards me. Then I know that I'm burning a good fever. So that's been true for 20 some years as well. That was a kind of a fun side effect to keep dealing with. But
that's not so bad.
There was no Dr. Google. There was no online support groups. I lived in a small mountain town where the cancer center was really kind of a jack of all trades, no expertise. No one knew what to do with a young person with cancer back then. Unfortunately, today we all have to know what to do with young people with cancer, because it's coming on with a vengeance. But I worked in the library. I was in college. I was pre-med. So I spent weeks literally living in the library, reading everything I could in the biochemistry, the anatomy, physiology, the microbiology, the pathophysiology. I wanted to understand cancer. And the literature I started running across, mind you, in the fall of 1991, was Otto Warburg's work.
Oh, yeah.
From the 1920s. So our library was pretty outdated and had a lot of old medical, textbooks and journals, which was lucky for me.
Exactly what you needed.
Exactly. And that resonated. What I was reading about resonated. So as you said before we started, I kind of became an early adopter of mito-hacking, as you called it.
Yeah.
So
I got that from Jack Cruz, so I can't steal that. Like, I just don't like biohacking, but I like mito-hacking for mitochondria.
Exactly. And that is exactly what I started working with, without knowing that that's what I was doing. And so one of the most significant changes I could make early on, which helped me resolve some of that terrible ascites, the end organ failure, weirdly, this goes completely against Western medicine recommendations, was I fasted for like 60 days.
Yeah. So how long? 60 days?
I'm trying, like, somewhere between like 45 and 60 days.
Wow, fantastic.
Water, herbal teas. I was vegetarian at that time. So no bone broths, by any means, but I couldn't eat, and everything I put in would throw up, and I probably had a bowel blockage. I mean, there were so many different things that I just basically rested my digestion, and slowly but surely the fluid started to degrade and leave my body, and my liver stopped hurting and started to improve, and my kidney function started to improve. Everything it was incredibly slow, and it was incredibly interesting to observe, but I wasn't dying, anymore. At least I didn't feel like I was dying anymore. I was not actively dying. I wasn't actually living yet, but I wasn't dying anymore at that time. And it took years for me to get to a place where I was actually pretty stable.
Wow.
And so by the time I started medical school in 96, I was on the journey for almost 5 full years.
Right.
For myself, and really didn't involve anybody in my care for that's a whole nother book, a whole nother made for TV.
I was going to say, I have a ton of questions just related to this. So yeah.
Exactly. It's like, there's some people that need to, there's some situations and people that need to be moved on from this plane before some of these stories could be made out there to explain my story. But needless to say, things we know about today, and especially in my interest in psychology, we know a lot about the ACE score, which is that adverse childhood event score.
Right.
And basically it's a 10 questionnaire, and anyone can go online and download it. and answer it for themselves. And basically, the more issues you experience before the age of 18, the higher your incidence of chronic illness or cancer.
Right.
And so, just without going into the gory details, because the story is not what's important, what you do with the story is.
Yes.
But I was a 10 out of 10 on the ACE score. So of course I had those health issues. Of course I did. And as I've said on some podcasts before, my diagnosis was an opportunity to leave this world because I wanted to leave this world. And cancer made me want to live. And so if anything, I say that it still kind of chokes me up. Yeah, I was pretty hell-bent on dying, and the diagnosis of cancer changed that. So if anything good comes of something bad, that would be an example.
Yeah. And that's a beautiful segue into like where you are now. And you must feel such elation when you're dealing with your patients and seeing them make progress and get past their cancer, or at least be able to do what you did and live beyond what was a terminal diagnosis. Like that has to be so rewarding for you.
It is. And even, I know this sounds weird to people, but I've even watched some of the most powerfully healing, moving, transformative death processes with people. Death is, we're all going to do that, right? That's the one promise of our lifetime is death. But I've gotten to watch people heal into dying in the most profound ways. So I don't ever see death as a failure, I guess. And I mean, what breaks my heart is when people die because of the treatments versus the cancer. And that's more often the case, that's not me being a naturopathic oncologist giving you woo-woo BS data. That is a deeply understood part of oncology. We hope that the treatment is not more devastating than the disease, but unfortunately it can be in many, many situations.
Well, and exactly, because I was telling you before we started recording that I lost my mom to stomach cancer in 98, and she was 45 years old, and it was stomach cancer, which gives you, they say 5% chance of living. And back then it probably was, maybe not so much now, but it wasn't the cancer, I don't believe, that killed her. It was all the treatments. It was the chemo she was completely fine the day she went in to find out that she had cancer. She was beautiful. She was living. She was working out. She was everything. But then it was the chemo that just tore her body down. And so the reason why I was interested in talking to you is like, we know so much more now, and it doesn't have to be this approach from the Band-Aid approach. We can actually go to the root of the problem and start to create the environment that can help someone thrive either amidst their cancer or even without, or at least, like you said, they do end up at this beautiful place of death where they're not in pain and they're not in misery, and they can die this beautiful death, versus this painful, horrible, like watch your mother die in a hospital bed in your home death, like that. That's why I wanted to talk to you. And so I have a ton of questions to ask you, and I think I could talk to you for eons of time, but we'll get started with some of the questions. So in your book, you specifically talk a lot about a ketogenic diet for cancer. And I love that because there's so many different principles behind why you would choose a ketogenic diet for cancers. And I want you to talk about that because in your book, you say the nuts and bolts of ketosis and ketogenic eating. But first, why ketogenic for cancer?
Well, just as we started a moment ago about the mitochondria and mitohacking, what basically happens when we get sick of any chronic illness, cancer or cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity, dementia, Alzheimer's, is that our primary fuel source, or I should say not our primary fuel source, our primary energy source, which is the production of ATP through our mitochondria, which are the little organelles that live in our cells, that they're the little, energy factories within our body. They start to get lazy, they start to break down, they start to die off, they become less efficient. And basically where we had since the beginning of time, been hybrid engines where we could easily go in and out of using fuel sources from carbohydrates or from fats. That is a place that we are naturally inclined to do normally. But in the last 100, 150 years, we have sort of pushed, especially the last 50 years when we went fat-free, fat-phobic, we really pushed the fat out and we really dumped the sugar into the gas tank. Okay. And what happens if you put a big old thing of sugar into your gas tank? You might get down the road, but you're sputtering and farting all the way along, not getting you very far. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That is ultimately what's happened. So we've created this environment where our poor mitochondria are burdened by such an inefficient fuel source that they can't keep up with the energy demands of the body. So they kind of just start to ferment and just get funky, just like a stagnant pool of water.
Right.
And that stagnation and that lack of productivity into our energy sources, everything else starts to go by the wayside. So it's like, oh, maybe our skin and our hair and our nails don't look as healthy, or, hey, you know what, who cares if your liver's a little bit deficient, you can still keep functioning. We just need to keep your heart and your brain alive. So It's like it starts to kind of ignore other parts. People's first symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction is fatigue. And that is the most common symptom of any health practitioner.
What you hear all day long. Yeah.
Right? They're coming out, I'm tired. Yes. That's it. And so the poor mitochondria are broken down. So in essence, my job as an integrative oncologist is to help people become dual burning energy, systems again. They need to get the gas pedal balanced out between fat and carbohydrate. And some people need to push the fat much more aggressively to really overcome some of the big hurdles that they're facing. Some just need to simply not eat, which is going to put you in a little bit. So a little bit of fasting is going to take some breaks, some of that burden out of the mix. And at the very least, to lower, we call it low carb today, but actually it's normal carb. It's when we say low carb, up until about 1850s or so, we were averaging 30 to 50 grams of carbohydrate a day. And today it's 300 to 400 grams of carbohydrate a day. So it's a big difference of thinking, and that I want you to get back to being a dual burning engine. And that's the base camp of any of your therapies, because the nuts and bolts of ketosis is that is how the body repairs itself. So we don't keep breaking down our tissues and creating DNA damage if our mitochondria are healthy and numerous and regenerating. So biogenesis of these. But when they start to become less in number, less efficient, and non-renewable, or the sick ones continue to live, like those of the cancer mitochondria, that's where we get disease. And so the way to improve outcomes is to improve the health of the mitochondria. You'll even have a better response to your conventional interventions. So to chemotherapies, targeted therapies, hormone blockade therapies, and radiation, if your mitochondria are functioning.
So if I understand this right, then you like to work from a mitochondria standpoint, to where if they do have to have things like chemo and radiation, you're not against those. You're just saying, I'm going to put you in a better state to where your body can handle what's about to happen to you, correct?
Exactly it. That's exactly. And that's where I think a lot of people think as a naturopathic oncologist, I'm going to be completely hooey against chemo and radiation. There's a time and a place. And here's the thing, what I'm against is how we do it today. Right.
We just jump right in. Like, just here's your first chemo treatment today, yeah.
The thing is, you don't have to guess anymore of what is appropriate treatment for you. You don't have to guess anymore of what is the appropriate dose. We know so much, the way we can test tumor tissue, the way we can test blood, the way we can test epigenetics, the way we can test labs, to even know exactly what therapies are going to help or hinder you. We know that today. It, to me, is so negligent that we do not take advantage of that.
Wow.
Then when we information, then we know what therapies, dietarily speaking or nutritionally or supplementally or herbally speaking, can come in and enhance those therapies even more. And so to me, it seems like malpractice and negligence not to think of a collective and a truly precision medicine approach, because we're talking good talk here saying, oh, we've created the precision medicine programs, but it's still based on selling a particular drug or a single protein damage with a single drug treatment. You're not going to get anywhere down the road with that one-to-one approach. You have to go global. Have to go to the whole terrain to make a difference in a condition.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the 10 different terrains in your book. But with regard to ketosis and mitochondrial diseases that might not be related to cancer, such as like just type 2 diabetes, which can relate to cancer. But just in general, if somebody's just dealing with what I call most diseases are mitochondrial diseases. Would ketosis, do you think it works for a wide range of just helping the mitochondria in general and dealing with, heart disease and all these different ailments, chronic fatigue that people come up with? Or is it more approached just with cancer? How do you feel about that?
That is such a good question. And again, kind of going back to the story I said of how we've lost our hybrid engine potential, that's what's led us to all chronic illness. So the diseases we die of today are inflammatory processes, which include inflammation of the cardiovascular system, the endocrine system, the cancering process, the neurological system. So things like diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, chronic fatigue syndrome, autism, and that whole spectrum.
Yeah.
Alzheimer's, I think I mentioned, but which is kind of funny that I brought that up twice. But anyway, all of these
very
cases,
important.
and they're all very much related to mitochondrial dysfunction. We now really understand that to be the root of this. So if we can bring in a therapy that at least, and it's the cool thing about a ketogenic diet is depending on the situation, the circumstance, the person, the staging, the type of disease process, the type of metabolic flexibility or lack thereof, it depends on, helps us determine what is the most appropriate approach for ketogenic diet. So for instance, people who just want to increase their longevity, they just want to feel better, maybe a little more clarity, maybe lose up a little weight, maybe stabilize their blood sugar a little bit. A simple, finishing your dinner at 6 p.m. and having breakfast at 10 a.m. is going to do a world of good for your whole body and being. So a little bit of an overnight fast, like a 12 to 16 hour fast. Yeah. We are such grazers today that we're like having a snack at bedtime. We're getting up in the middle of the night to have another snack, and we're eating the second we pop out of bed. We don't go into what's known as autophagy. So we're not taking out the garbage. So it just accumulates. So I think
glad you said that. I have so many listeners, so many people that keep telling me, well, I need to try that. And I'm like, it's natural human biology to go 12 hours without eating.
Exactly. And there's even the last year, there's been 2 studies out of MD Anderson about women who fast for 13 hours that had breast cancer will lower their risk of recurrence by 70% simply by a 13-hour fast. And it's just such a subtle shift, and it's not difficult because most of that time you're sleeping. Does a world of good. Right. And then if someone has, let's say, a brain tumor, okay, that is a metabolic sink, it's just crazy pills. Then you need to be in a therapeutic ketogenic state. When I say therapeutic, that means on a blood level of 3 to 6 on blood ketones minimum. Wow. And you kind of stay there, right? Like probably forever to some degree, or very carefully titrate if you're not sure, working with someone out there. Other cancers, so yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That's right. Well, that's other cancers don't need to be quite that state of ketosis. They could be more in a nutritional state, which is between 0.5 and 3 on their blood count. And that is more of just helping take out the garbage, but also sort of upregulating other chemical pathways to make them respond better to conventional therapies. So it works nicely as an adjuvant therapy with certain chemotherapies, radiation, targeted therapies. But it also lowers, stabilizes. I think you were telling me the story of someone you know and love with a neuro-endocrine tumor that has stabilized the growth. And so that's one thing that we've seen that a ketogenic diet does is sort of stall the proliferation and at least buy you time so other therapies can work in on it, or so you can bring in other therapeutics to more aggressively go after the tumor burden itself.
Well, and I'm so glad you brought that up because there's a twofold question here for you. Since your diagnosis, do you stay chronically ketogenic? Are you still to this day ketogenic with your approach? And then my other question will be, no, that's okay. My other question is going to be I want you, it's not really a question. I want you to tell them, where you are now with your diagnosis, because I think some people don't realize that.
Cool. Well, first of all, as I was telling you before the show, I wish I had my book 27 years ago. When I finally wrote the book, when Jess and I decided to finally tackle this book, we did it for ourselves because I was tired of saying the same thing over and over. And people would say, well, where do I learn this? Where do you get all this information? Cataloged in my brain for 25 plus years. And I need a place to put it down because it's gathered from the experts that I've studied from all over the world for a long time, plus practice on myself, plus practiced on tens of thousands of people. with hundreds of thousands of labs that I've reviewed to understand these patterns and, propensities. So that's number one. Number two, by the time I decided to actually take on a ketogenic lifestyle was almost 20 years into my diagnosis.
Really? Okay.
And so that often shocks people because my diagnosis, my terminal diagnosis was at 19, although I'd had 2 small bouts of cancer at age 14 and 16 prior to that. Whole nother story. Wow. But basically at 16 years old, I decided to become a vegetarian. So as a vegetarian living in Wichita, Kansas, that meant I could have iceberg lettuce and Velveeta cheese. And what that was about my favorite food on the planet with Wonder Bread and Miracle Whip dressing. That was my favorite on the planet. So there was no live food in there. There just wasn't. Yeah. So I stayed basically a hardcore vegetarian until, and even 7 of those years vegan, and 2 of those years raw food vegan, all the way until I was about 30, 32 years old. At that time, my Chinese medicine professor, I could not get, even though I'd stabilized my cancer to some degree because it was still a leg up compared to the latchkey kid fast food, canned boxed food I'd been eating. When I started to incorporate vegetables, I also incorporated a lot of crap because I was like the junk food vegetarian, which a lot of us go into that realm. And I was eating tons and tons and tons of carbohydrates. So I wasn't getting ahead of it. I was keeping myself alive, but it was like having a nostril out of the swimming pool and just making laps. So when I finally started to remove things like gluten, I took gluten out pretty early on. That made a difference in a lot of my inflammatory markers. That really solved a lot of problems, but I was still eating pretty much no animal protein and I was getting sicker and sicker. I never got that iron, my ferritin level up. It's still pretty low to this day, but I'm functioning. I've got a lot of good blood flow now. But basically I was almost completely vegetarian until about 2005. And then I started to incorporate in a little bit of eggs, a little bit of fish, then slowly over time, a little bit of poultry, and in 2010 is when I made the big leap. I left gluten and all grains. I went totally paleo and my health went from holding its own to thriving within 6 months. It was a massive change for me. And my husband joined me on that journey as well. And a lot of his health changed and improved as well. Speaking of, I think he just came home. And then what happened is probably in 2012, I think is when we decided to go for keto and started playing with that. And it was like another massive step up into how our physiology was functioning. And really at this point in time, I go keto purposefully a few times a year to put myself into a deep therapeutic state with either diet or deeper fasting, like a 3 to 5 day water fast. But now if I just go to bed after dinner and get up and check my ketone, my blood sugar, my ketones the next morning, I'm in a natural low grade nutritional ketosis all the time now. Yeah. It just stays there. I've become that dual engine and my chemistry and my labs and my cancer markers are the best they've ever been. But it took me 27 years to get it figured out, really. But I was improving along the way. So keep that in mind. But I had to walk the journey myself. I did all of the diets you can possibly imagine. I studied everything. I studied all the cleanses, all the detoxes, applied them to myself before applying to patients. Right. But I finally, for me, becoming that dual engine in whatever way that happens for people, because there's a variety of ways to achieve that, was the key to my vitality.
And so that's the point I wanted to get to, is that you actually still have cancer or are you in remission?
Well, remission means that there's no evidence of disease. Okay. And I don't think we could ever say that about me because I still have, I can still palpate the tumor in my right ovary. I don't get scans anymore because they shut down my kidneys every time. So that's terrible. But I still have, stuff that goes on in my liver. I still have peritoneal implants. I still get lymphedema and a lot of stuff in my pelvis, my lymph nodes. But it doesn't, my tumor markers, everything else are great. My terrain values are great. Yeah. So my body worked with it. My body has walled it off and we're living synergistically together.
I think it's beautiful because it's like this is what people need to realize, is that it's not a death sentence when you hear the C word, and you don't have to say like F cancer, you can live a completely normal life. Like it can serve you better, and it can create within you this desire to treat your body with the most utmost respect. And I think that what you're saying is beautiful, and how you use the term cancering, like I'm cancering and it's fine. Like it's not a big deal. And I just wanted to put that out, especially to women that are really afraid. I think women more so even than men are just so afraid when they hear that C word. And so that's why I wanted to mention that too. Yeah.
I really appreciate you brought that up because, that's that place is, all of us have cancer all the time. It's part
right.
of us.
Exactly.
And it's when we lose the communication within our body and being, when we lose track of that communication is when growth signals and things go off the tracks. Okay? And it starts to behave differently, and it's not behaving the way it normally should, or healthy physiology should. That's where we move into a place of cancering or diseasing or whatever label is applied to you in that moment.
Right.
What's really nice is that that's not easy. It takes your doing and understanding what's going on and addressing it head on. So my mantra is always test, assess, address, to understand exactly what's driving the process and then adjust accordingly along the way. And so we can go out of balance, but we can also come back into balance at any given time. And it's just that, it's a process.
Yeah.
And I've always been against I didn't really, and I still don't really like to talk about my story much because I don't associate myself as being a cancer patient. I never have. In fact, I really tried to get away from even sharing my story because I don't want people to associate with me that that's the situation. The situation is that I'm a living, breathing, dynamic being. What's happening in my body is different and moment by moment by what I fuel it with my thoughts, the people I surround myself with, the toxins I'm exposed to or limiting, season, the community, all of those things impact us. And when we start to go into when we go into the battle against cancer, the war against cancer, you got to kill it, you got to eradicate, you got to kill. That's you. So you're killing, eradicating, FUing yourself when you go down that road. And I am not a fan of that terminology. I know it helps people get their battle cry going on, but I like to use the quote a lot of what is cancer trying to heal in you? Because I said that early on where I got pretty emotional about it made me want to live. Yeah. Right. That is often a lot of us on this planet are so fearful of dying that we aren't living.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So really put a little fire under the butt to get you going again.
Yeah, it can be a beautiful thing if you let it, because it can create so much good. And I mean, even in my own life, I lost my mom, but this is why I do what I do, is because of what she went through. So I love to see people thriving and coming and changing their nutrition, changing their lifestyle. And then it makes me go, okay, so she did that so that I could, be a part of this person's journey to help them create a more optimal self. So I could talk about that all day long, but I'll get back into the questions here because I don't want to take up all your time all evening. But so I'm going to let them look up in the book what the nuts and bolts of ketogenic diet are, because it's really well laid out in there. I mean, all the way down to the food lists and everything. So I love that. So I wanted to touch on this because I don't know if you've checked any of my recent podcasts, but here's a big question for you, kind of the new trend that's going on. And I wanted your thoughts on it because you do talk really great about meat in your book, and grass-fed meat, and then just meat in general. And all of, one of the things you wrote in here was how red meat in general has every single vitamin in it. And people don't realize that. And I loved that part of your book where you touched on that. But I've recently embarked on I'm on month 3 of a carnivore diet. And it's a big movement right now. So I wanted to ask a doctor's opinion of somebody who, there's been the whole studies that meat causes cancer and things like that. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on it and see where you have heard about this or what you think about it.
Cool. Well, first of all, I really love it when people are living laboratories. I want people N=1. I want people to do their own experimentation, get your labs, notice what you're feeling, journal what you're experiencing. That's very important to do. So I'm not against someone going into a carnivore diet, except if someone has cancer.
Okay. Very good to know. Please elaborate.
And so that is, and I've got really good friends and colleagues who are really into this and really are preaching it out there, living it and experiencing it and sharing it. And and even some of them say, I think it's even good for cancer. I don't see that to be the case.
I agree with you.
Okay. And that's the place where if you have a relatively healthy body, or maybe something like a lot of terrible autoimmune and terrible leaky gut stuff, maybe going on to a mono diet like that can be helpful to overcome and prevent some of these future issues. And it definitely can reset the metabolic rate, et cetera. But the problem with it being fully carnivorous, and yes, it does have all the nutrients, and yes, there is a time and a place for animal protein in a cancering patient and not, is that you need the cofactors, you need the polyphenols, you need the other nutrients, the plants. And I know that there's a lot of people out there like, oh, plants are dangerous, the lectins of plants. I'm here to tell you, that's the one common thread of all anti-cancer diets on the planet today, whether it was Gerson, vegan, vegetarian, raw food, paleo, keto, is the common denominator of health and vitality is a plant-based diet. Okay. And that's for the long haul. Again, a few months of trying anything, whether a few months vegan, a few months raw food, a few months carnivore, those are like just giving your body a cool little shift or overhaul to kind of like tune up the engine and just see how it settles for you. I absolutely encourage that type of self-exploration in someone who's otherwise healthy. But when we have cancer, we need so many growth factors or so many nutrients to help with stabilizing growth factors and nourish the tissues of the body. They're really screaming out. They're really starving, and they need a complex, nutrient-dense way to help resurrect that respiration from fermentation process within the mitochondrial engine. And so it's very powerful for that. So I know it's not exactly maybe the answer you were looking for to some degree, but I think
actually it was. I wanted people to realize that this carnivore approach is something that is a option. Like it's a way of, they call it a way of eating, but it doesn't have to be forever. It's kind of like when it actually was proliferant in the ancestral days was when there was no vegetation available. So it was what brought me to it was my husband came home with a deer one day, and I thought to myself, if we had lived out in the woods behind our home, and I had to go get food right now, all I could get would be deer. Like there's no vegetation. We live in dead brown land right now. There's no green. So it would be a bunny, it would be a squirrel, it would be a deer, and that's it. And so I thought, for a time it would be appropriate, and for the right individual whose system wasn't so bogged down with acidity, because I feel like, as you would probably know better, cancer can be very acidic, or it creates an acidic state in the body. So I would think that the plant-based diet would counteract that with more alkalinity, which would be why it would be necessary. Am I touching on anything good there?
It's all good. You're hitting it all good. And I love, just when you go back to our ancestral health, we weren't going years on a carnivorous diet. We were going maybe several weeks to several months max, just like being in a deep state of therapeutic ketosis. We were never like, oh, I'm going to live in a deep state of therapeutic ketosis. The point of all of our health and vitality is to be that hybrid engine. Where it's necessary. And for someone to be able to tolerate a purely carnivorous diet, you have to be pretty metabolically stable.
And metabolic flexibility is important too. Like that's what you were saying, like with yourself, where you're dual burning, like you're burning fat and you can burn sugar, and that's that metabolic flexibility. And so I think while it is a tool, it doesn't have to be forever. And so I wanted to get that point across to people, and it takes the right individual. It's bio-individuality. Yeah,
it is. And it's fascinating. It's a fascinating thing. And I applaud you for, like I said, being that living laboratory, because you learn so much about yourself. You learn what works, what doesn't work in your body. And it's funny because I will naturally gravitate more into, I actually prefer a vegetarian diet, which is funny. My cells and my physiology require a different thing. So my belief system and maybe my dogma to some degree want a certain thing, but my body is asking for something different.
Oh, interesting.
Integrate the two.
That's good. Right? That's balance right there. Yeah, for sure. And it's listening to your bio-individual needs. So I love that.
And it tends it tends, like you're like in the winter, that would make much more sense to be having a lot more meat. And in the summer, it makes a lot more sense to be having a lot more veggies, like just because of what is growing around you naturally. But when you can get a papaya in Durango, Colorado in December, that's not normal. That actually is more harmful to the microbiome and to the metabolic process than if you were just eating a carnivorous diet through the winter.
Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree. And then another question I just thought of too is, so with the approach to cancer, do you feel like all cancer is treated the same with ketosis? Like, does ketosis affect all forms of cancer, or is there any outside the realm of that that just wouldn't come into play?
Oh, I love this question. This is such, you're thinking in
Thinking
that
machine.
critical,
Yeah.
you're a thinking machine. You're jamming up here.
Ketosis, man. Ketosis, brain clarity. So yeah.
It is, honest to God.
Yeah.
So there are certain cancer types that are going to be, that are going to have a cytotoxic response with a ketogenic diet. What I mean by that is there are certain cancers that will actually, cancer cells will die in the midst of ketones. Okay. So meaning that it acts somewhat like a chemotherapy. I'm really oversimplifying this.
Yeah.
Then there are cancers that maybe the starving of the glucose isn't going to make a big difference because it's not a very glucose-centric cancer type.
Okay.
But what the ketones do is they set up a different, they lower other metabolic factors. They lower other growth factors. They change proliferation signals and, growth. So they work on what's known as the 10 hallmarks of cancer. And we have that section of the book as well. It's like a little list of, that it's ignoring growth signals or stop signals, I should say, that lack of communication. The metabolism is only one of the 10 hallmarks. And there are certain cancers such as brain cancer that are very metabolically unstable, and you want to bring that stability in right away. There are actually, in our book, we even touched on, and by the time the book came out, already the data was changing. So that's part of why I don't like having a book, because the information's dynamic and we're learning. So in our book, we actually said, hey, maybe prostate cancer wouldn't be as responsive to this, although 3 studies have come out since our book, as well as, 2 or 3 dozen patients with prostate cancer that are rocking it on a ketogenic diet.
So I'll make that note with my crayon in the book. I'll just say, yes, that's okay.
Thank you. I love that. And so going crayon, that's good.
This is okay. Yeah.
Good. And it's working on the other hallmarks of cancer. And that's just it. So it's enhancing. Where I look at the ketogenic diet across all tumor types is I think of it as the Trojan horse to allow other therapies to work better.
Okay.
So it's an adjunct or a supportive mechanism, not as a standalone. There are certain cancers where it could almost be a standalone, and I've seen it clinically over and over. But for the most part, it is a great support network to whatever therapy, whether it's hyperbaric oxygen, IV vitamin C, mistletoe, chemotherapy, radiation, PARP inhibitors, you name it, are going to work beautifully. Like for instance, right now, the hottest talk is immunotherapies, and checkpoint inhibitors are PD-1 inhibitors. Ketogenic diet acts like a natural PD-1 inhibitor.
Nice.
So isn't that beautiful? So there's these simple things that we are upregulating. We are changing the immune system with the ketogenic diet. We're changing the microbiome. Even fasting for 3 days completely changes your immune function. So these are the types of things that I think that people get hung up on the diet itself, or that it's, like, oh, it didn't work for me. Well, first of all, it might not have been enough. Like, you needed to bring other tools in. Second of all, I find most people aren't actually in ketosis that think they are. The majority, I see hundreds and hundreds of patients on, who said, I've been on the ketogenic diet, and I start looking at their macros, I start looking at their diet diaries, I start saying, well, how did you measure it? And they're like, oh, on urine. I'm like, you definitely weren't in ketosis.
You're in low carb, low fat land. Like it's usually high protein, low carb, low fat land. Yeah.
Terrible, and it's actually all your proteins turning into sugar, and it's just a nightmare. So you have to really think of this thoughtfully, and that's why I love Miriam Kalamian's book, my friend and colleague who put that book out this year specific to cancer, because a lot of the keto information out there is not specific to a cancer patient. And Miriam's book has done a gorgeous job really just focusing on 100% on the biochemistry and the physiology of keto for cancer, and it's so good. So good. So that'll be your next.
What's the title of that?
Keto for Cancer.
Oh, okay. So I'll put that in the show notes too. But yeah, that'll be my next read. Apparently, if I can put yours down, I just keep reading it over and over again. But you talked about mistletoe. You brought that up, and so that was my next question. Is I want you to talk about in the book, like tell me just briefly about mistletoe therapy.
simply put, Mistletoe is a 100-year-old therapy that started in Germany by the likes of Ida Wegman and Rudolf Steiner, and has been used as an adjuvant therapy for cancer since 1917.
Okay.
This therapy is basically an immunomodulation therapy. So now we're doing all this billions of dollars into research on immunomodulators, and yet we have a really excellent one. It's so excellent, in fact, that there's been over 4,000 clinical trials all over the world.
So it's not just for smooching, huh? Like it's got
not just for making out at Christmas time, people. Right. No way. Okay. It is absolutely about immune modulation, and there's actually a clinical trial that I helped consult on at Johns Hopkins that started in February of 2017. And there are a few more they'll be getting up and running this year. And in September, my colleague, Dr. Christina Compton, and I have edited and written chapters in a book on mistletoe, bringing kind of a modern take on it, on this 100-year-old plant medicine. So people understand that there is a very valuable therapy to add to their cancering process, but it's also helpful. The book talks about its use in co-infections, endocrine disorders, autoimmune issues, pet health, you name it. So we've spoken with 17 experts all over the world from 7 countries, that this book comes out in September. And I'm really excited about your listeners to get a better sense of how powerful, because probably the only country in the world that doesn't use it actively on a regular basis is the United States.
Oh, that's so, not surprised.
Although
how is it implemented? Is it injection? Is it like some, okay. So it's a constant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We teach the patient how to do it. So the patient does it to themselves.
Okay. Great.
You can also have IV, which is really good for people with really aggressive processes. And then my colleagues around the world also do it intratumorally, intraperitoneally. Like that would have been a great therapy for my ascites back in 1991.
Wow.
And so there's actually clinical trials, even starting in the US, about injecting it into the abdomen of people that are filled with cancer.
Wow. And have you done it on yourself as well?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't start.
You're like me. We're just big guinea pigs. That's all we are. Let's just try everything that comes out.
My husband, my friend, I've used it on tons, and I didn't even bring it into my mix until a few years ago. Like, again, it was sort of like I've learned things, and I started using it in my patients well before myself. Same with the ketogenic diet. Used it in my patients long before myself. These are things that the studies made sense, but I didn't really think I needed to apply it to myself.
Yeah.
That's the problem with being a doctor. We are the worst patients. So, but yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. And so what part of the terrain would that be considered in?
That would be under the immune chapter, the immunomodulation, or was that what you were referring to?
Yes. And I segued that because I wanted you to go ahead and can you just briefly say what all the 10 terrain are? Because it isn't just about ketosis. It isn't just about the additional therapies you can get. There's so much more that goes into not only for cancer treatments and just healing that, but also life in general. These 10 terrain applies to every single one of us that's watching this.
It does. And so I like to liken it to a bucket, and that bucket represents the mitochondria. Okay, we've talked a lot about that. So what goes into that bucket, or what you take out of that bucket, is what's key to your vitality. So the first thing that goes into that bucket is epigenetics. So what was passed down from generations prior to you. That's a dynamic genetic process, meaning that you can think it into or out of existence, eat it into or out of existence, etc. So you have power to overcome your epigenetics.
Yes.
That bucket. Number 2, your microbiome. Okay, so if you're like born C-section and weren't breastfed, you're pretty much never got a microbiome. So you're kind of screwed. So that was me. It was like all of us. And then of course, if you get your vaccines and you get your antibiotics and you're putting your antibiotics in your eyeballs, right as you're popping out of a vagina.
I think I lived on that pink antibiotic kid fluid. I think that was just always in the fridge, and that's what I drank my entire life growing up.
That's like a shot of whiskey. It was like your shot of antibiotics. But that's how most of us are today. So that our microbiome is taken a beating. And it also takes from our food, because our food is fed antibiotics and glyphosate. And so we're eating that, and those are well documented to destroy our own microbiome. So it's coming at us from everywhere. So the microbiome goes into that bucket. Another big in that bucket is our thoughts, our mental, emotional well-being. We talked about the more early on in childhood traumas, but any stressors really will throw off our mitochondria. So people like Bruce Lipton's work on biology of belief is all about how our thoughts and our emotions affect our mitochondrial epigenetic expression. So a big one. Then the other 7 biggies that jump in there is obviously we've talked about the sugar stuff. So dysglycemia, hormone imbalance. Now hormones, if you're drinking unfiltered water, you're drinking other people's birth control pills, and HRT and steroids. So you're like loading up. If you touch plastics, you're just, it's like, I see so many feminized men. I see so many 20-year-olds with cancer that have no libido. I'm like, oh my God, if you met my husband at 22, where you'd like, good Lord, like the men, I'm so sad to see this. Like we are living in such an estrogen swimming pool that we're all like, our men are becoming more feminized and our women are becoming more masculinized just because it's tweaking our system in a pretty tremendous way. And then we've got things like inflammation, a key driver, angiogenesis, so circulatory issues, stressors. So stress circadian rhythm is huge. And this is why we're wearing our silly glasses right now. To avoid that toxicants. Ginormous. There is no such thing as a healthy planet anywhere anymore. And so my colleague, Dr. Walter Crinnion says that it's just a matter, it's not, do you have toxicity? It's to what level, is your body overflowing? I think I covered all of the items that go in the bucket, but each of those 10 patterns are what contribute to or take away from the health of your mitochondria. And you want to test, assess, and address those at any given time, because people are always so shocked when they receive a diagnosis of cancer. And what I always tell people is I'm shocked that we're not all walking around with a diagnosis.
Right. Yeah. No kidding. I totally get that. Yeah, for sure. And one part, which I talk about in several of my podcasts, is the toxicity of clothing. People don't think about that. I mean, before I transformed my whole wardrobe recently, and I did it through used clothing on Poshmark, by the way, but I got more organic and natural fibers, but they were just some used clothes that I traded in and out. But my whole closet as a fitness instructor was polyester, and elastane and stuff. And I literally sat there one day and go, okay, I'm telling people not to drink out of plastic bottles, but I'm swimming my skin in plastic right now. And so I did podcasts on this, and people don't take it seriously because they're like, it's not something that you don't feel it, you don't think about it, you don't look at your body and think it affects you. But I wanted you to touch on that because what you wrote in your book is so profound, and people need to understand how powerful this is.
And my co-author Jess Kelly, her passion is really around the clothing and the makeup and the stuff we put on our bodies. And she always talks about how the body, it's like our skin is millions of mouths. Okay. And so if you've got that fiber, up against you and you have certain sensitivities, you're going to know it. If you don't have sensitivities, you're still absorbing that. So for instance, cotton is the most pesticided, if that's a word, glyphosated.
It is now.
It is now. Material on the planet. We put that on our skin and it is absorbing right into our tissues, right into our tissues. And so finding organic cotton is key, where, linen, wool, those are the hemp, my God, the natural fiber for us. I mean, these are the basic, this is what our again, we didn't have all these things until the 60s, the 70s when we started making plastics. The whole Graduate movie is invest in plastics. It's all plastics. It is all plastics today.
It's so sad. It's just really, it's that we are a plastic world, and it's, I just look at it as it's not that hard to go more organic, and not everything. It's not like every single piece of clothing has to be eliminated, but just do what you can with what you have, make the best choices with what you can. And like I said, I wasn't going to go out and buy like $50 shirts that were organic. So I went and found used ones online, and you can do that. eBay, Poshmark, whatever. It's like, they're clean. People wash them before they send them. So it's okay.
It's off gassed by now, so it's all yours. But, then spend the money on good organic clothing, but then come home and wash it in a pile of chemicals.
Exactly.
Fabric softener, or their dryer sheet that's not quality into that thing. So every step has to go. And the places where you spend the most amount of time in your bed, so your sheets, your bedding, what is up against your skin, so your bras, your underwear, that's especially around your genitals and your breasts. These little areas that are super sensitive to endocrine disrupting. The your products, that you put on your deodorant, your body cream, you have to be thoughtful, and you start to look like the person who's going to be wearing a tinfoil hat all the time. But I know too much now to know that we hang out while we put on my tinfoil. It's like
put them on with our blue blockers too.
Exactly. Exactly. At this point, I know that living on the planet today, we all have to take that extra step, and wherever you can clean it up, you make a dent. You change what is in that bucket. And you're right. Like the clothing is a really key and overseen, overlooked possibility. So thank you for bringing that up.
No, that's what I wanted you to reiterate. It's like, I keep telling people this, but I want them to hear it from a doctor who has seen people at death's door and knows the toxicity level in their body and knows that this is real. Like, you might think you're immune to all this stuff, but you're not. And we want to create the most optimal life so we feel our best, so we can serve the people that we love and we can live this best life. And so it's so important to look at not just diet and not just exercise and not just, what lotion you're putting on your body, but there's so many different factors that go into it. But without becoming dogmatic and going, I don't know how to control any of this, what am I going to do? Just do what you can with what you have and take the steps as time goes on to make those small changes. And those small changes yield big results, correct?
That is exactly right. And so, when I have folks start to do a pantry overhaul or a house overhaul, I tell my friends and family and podcasts, if you ever invited me to your house, I will be going through your medicine cabinet. I will be looking at your sink. I will be looking at your garage.
Mm-hmm. And your closet. You got to do a closet. Don't just look in the pantry, look in the closet too.
Oh, so I can walk into someone's house and know if it's like poison or not. Like if I start, I immediately.
Me too. Yeah.
Like candles and scented things and all the, it's.
Yeah.
So
get rid of the Glade air fresheners, all of that. No more Febrezing the sofa. If you want to clean your sofa, just like spray with water and vinegar. It'll be fine. So.
Exactly. And so, it's like I keep thinking, we have a couch downstairs that really should be set on fire. But I don't want to, because to get an organic couch at this point is going to cost my money. So I'm like, at least this one has been off gassed for so long that it's good to go. So throw a blanket over it and it's now,
right.
couch. But these are the weird things. We just have to take steps so people can start, finish up that particular product and then buy the replacement.
Mm-hmm.
Finish. It's not like you have to throw everything away because every little step that makes a big difference.
Absolutely.
And you can find glass containers at places like Ross and TJ Maxx, or you can find the used, like you said, the used nice, linen clothing and whatnot on, thrift stores are actually a great place. If you know what your brands are pretty clean, you can go like Eileen Fisher and a bunch of those, or use organic materials.
Mm-hmm.
You can start to really dig and find these things and not spend a fortune.
Right. Yes. I'm so glad you said that, because people just think it's so impossible to like clean up not only their home life and their lifestyle, but to clean up their diet. And none of it has to be hard. You just start doing small changes at a time, and you just start looking in all the right places and ask the right questions. Like reach out to me, reach out to other nutritionists, or reach out to Dr. Nasha, and that we're sure to email you back and go, yeah, just go to TJ Maxx. You'll find a little glass container, like, so.
Exactly. It's like a nature farm at this point, right? Like you don't even think about it anymore. It just is. But it wasn't always like that. My husband would tell you, like when he started putting broccoli in my boxed mac and cheese, I thought he was the devil. So, there was like a long way from there.
Yeah. Yes. Well, you have shared so much knowledge today with me and my listeners, and you've been so generous with your time. I don't want to take any more, but I definitely want to ask you, can we do this again? Because I've had so much fun with you. And I just
got to this many of your questions.
Yeah, I still have like a whole 13 pages of questions to go, and I still have like so many crayon stars in here that I wanted to ask you about. So, but you've been amazing and awesome, and I just want everybody to go right out and get this book, because whether you have any issue with cancer or not, this book will be effective in every aspect of your life, because there's so many different terrains that it touches on. So, and like Dr. Nasha will know, I'm not endorsing this. Like I don't have any affiliation with her. I'm just telling you that there's sand in this book. Okay. It's been on trips with me. That's how important it is. I didn't leave it at home. I didn't get the audiobook. I took it with me. So anyway, that's enough of that. But where can people find you and reach out to you? And maybe if someone's listening and they have just been diagnosed with cancer, how could they get a consult with you even?
Excellent. Well, first of all, you can find me on, Jess and I have a Facebook page for the Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Mm-hmm. And then she has her business, Remission Nutrition, which is very specific oncology nutrition focused. So she can help people that are just looking at the nutritional side of things. There's that piece specific for cancer. My consulting company is optimalterrainconsulting.com. And there's also a Facebook page of that. And I always put tons and tons and tons and tons of great
and
content.
Twitter. You have a great Twitter too, because I'm always going,
exactly.
yes, like that.
I know, it's good. So I try. love to engage. I love to have people know what's out there. So that's a great way. You can also contact me at info@optimalterrainconsulting.com, and Raquel, my assistant, will walk through all of your questions and give you the answers to anything regarding a consultation with me. We are booked out a ways, but one of the things that'll probably be up in the next week, so I don't know when you're putting this out here, but on our page, it's kind of like 5 things to do. It's a free little download that'll be up in the next week of kind of like, what do you do if you get diagnosed? You know, and like
beautiful.
a starting point. So there's some great little fodder that's on the site. There's tons and tons of resources and other podcasts and other informational. You know, we want it to be a source of inspiration, but also good information, which you said early on to me. You know, we're getting ready to do some training for practitioners. We need more of us on the ground.
I'm doing it. I'm at the first training. I'm going to be there. I'm doing it. So
she is. She's stalking you for a year. It's good. We're going to have her on. But this is so needed because this is a global epidemic. And I want us to overcome the statistics of this. And it doesn't lean on one person or a handful of people. It leans on thousands of people. And your work, Jodelle, to get this type of information out to your listeners is so key for them to realize they have so much more power to change things in their body and thrive, truly thrive.
Yes, when you give the body the optimal terrain, it is a way that it can grow and flourish in a beneficial way and not a harmful way. So,
yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to give a teaser that the next time we talk, I want to talk about radiation, like not the therapy, but I mean the exposure too. So just saying that's what we're doing next time. Yes. 10-foil hat. We're going to talk about that. So that's their teaser for next time. So, thank you so much. And please check her out, you guys, and post your comments below. I'll be happy to try to answer questions the best I can, or I'll field them from her. So
I'll be happy to help. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Nasha. I so appreciate you. My new paddleboard buddy.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm going to get out there with you.
Okay, great. All right. Bye for now.